This is an example of perfect grafting. The sample's been prepared with a flap of waste yarn in stocking stitch, and the first row of pattern was in the brown yarn, and you can see that the pattern has actually affected the way the white stitches lay, and we're going to use those to help us put in the missing row. At the completion of the knitting, I finished one row short of the pattern repeat, so I need one more row of brown stitches to unite the beginning to the end. This is an example of the heads of the final row of stitches joining to the feet of their great-great-grandparents, and we should be able to do this without any visible change in the pattern. So the row is begun with a piece of I-cord, and my next stitch would have been this white one, and this would have been in brown. So I bring my needle into that purple stitch, and then I go to the first stitch on the I-cord at the starting end, and you can tell it's this one because the tail is sticking out there. So I'm going to graft around both sides of that blue stitch and back to the final end, where I've got to go back into that purple stitch again, as indicated by this piece of white waste yarn. So if I follow the waste yarn, then that is the path that the brown yarn should have taken. Now, because this is an I-cord, we're going to have to remove the waste yarn once I have grafted it in order to be able to join it properly. So I'm actually working with fairly loose stitches right now. So I've got 4 stocking stitches to do. And I'm going around the base of the last of the I-cord stitches and into the last I-cord stitch, and I'm ready to start the flat part of the row. But before I go any further, I want to adjust these stitches and remove the waste yarn. I'm going to flip that up out of the way, and I'm going to cut the side of one of these stitches here. And using my darning needle, I'll pull out the yarn holding the base of that I-cord. So that's free. Now I'm going to do the same to cut away the I-cord just from the edge. After that I can leave the waste yarn in place. Now that I've cut away the waste yarn top and bottom from the I-cord, I'm just going to gather those stitches to the right size and shape. This is the first one. Now that the stitches are the right size, you can see that the I-cord is now unbroken. Now I can continue across the row, and I've got some little cables happened here, but that's not a problem. And I also have some purl bumps as well. So I'm in the side of the first pattern stitch here, as indicated by the waste yarn, and my next stitch I have to copy up here. The white yarn went up and back down, creating that purl bump. Then I come to the underside again, back in here and into that stitch that was cabled across. Around the base of this cabled stitch. back in to copy this next white stitch, which goes both into a brown and a contrast stitch. So as long as I follow the waste yarn, it will guide me to completely perfectly match this pattern. You've always got to watch out for those first purl bumps. So my yarn has got to come up here, and I'm copying that white purl bump. On this side it's quite straightforward, and I know that I've got 4 pearls to complete before I get to the next cable. Up and down, 2 sides, up and down, and I'm trying to pull this to about the right gauge straight away so I don't have to come back and fiddle with the stitches later. And here we are at the junction. It's a purl, then it's a knit, so you always have to be very careful at the transition because it tucks itself underneath, so that piece of white yarn goes down there. Very easy to miss. And this takes me into the side of the cable column, and that's confirmed by the fact I'm going around the base of a cable just up there. Follow the waste yarn. I should have cut my sewing yarn to at least 4 times the width of this row, but I didn't, so I'm joining a new piece of sewing yarn by doing exactly what I did with the old one, and then continuing my graft. Each time you go across, in this case a group of 4 stitches, it confirms that you're on track, because if you reach the cable too soon on one side, then you are not in the right spot, and you might have missed one of these tricky little pearls because it's tucked under there. Into the last one on that side, and the white yarn takes me from that purple stitch into that brown one, and now I can connect it to the base of that cable.